story fables and ghostly tales.
Welcome, listeners, to the Stories, Fables, Ghostly Tales podcast, and today is a special episode. It's also a somber one at that. I came across a Reddit that discussed and shared their missing person stories. After reaching out to a number of Redditors, I chose 7 missing person stories just for you. The goal of this episode was to cover a different kind of story than I usually cover, and also jump into a different slice of true life horror. Now, before I dive into today's episode, these are true stories, so I ask that you please respect those that have approved of me sharing their story in the comments, as there are families and friends out there that are still grieving. It's why I have in no way embellished the stories. It just wouldn't be appropriate. If you ever encounter a situation where you yourself need to report a missing person, here are some first steps that you should take should your loved one go missing. Number 1. Don't wait 24 hours. If your suspected missing person made a promise to be somewhere and you can't get hold of them, don't wait hours, wait minutes. Keep trying, and if you can't get hold of them, report it. It's just as easy to cancel that report. Number 2. Contact the police as your first point of call. In Australia, you can also report it directly to the missing persons website. The website address is missingpersons.gov.au. Number 3. Don't touch the person who went missing's stuff. And don't let others into the house. Lock it down ASAP, because you just don't know what clues or information the police can use that others who enter your house could tamper with, even if they're trying to help. Number 4. The first 24 hours is your best chance of locating the missing person, and if it extends past this point, don't be afraid to contact a private investigator to work on the case, provided you can afford it. Look to the community for help, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask. And lastly, number 5, try not to beat yourself up. These cases are unpredictable, can happen to anyone, and take place often in random ways. Spend time acting on your thoughts rather than worrying about them. I know it's easier said than done, but it is time better spent. And with this advice in mind, now onto our stories. Our first story is by Crow1980. My best friend's ex went missing on December 8th of 2016. She had been staying with him to help care for their 5-year-old son, though they had a pretty rocky relationship, to put it mildly. Anyway, she called in sick to work that day and didn't meet her dad for a scheduled dinner the next day, which caused concern. But my best friend claimed she'd left with a guy he didn't recognize, and he hadn't heard from her since. She'd previously been into drugs and other questionable stuff, and had disappeared before for a few days at a time. So no one was too concerned until it dragged on to a week, then 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. The police became involved, and of course my best friend was the prime suspect, given previous incidents when they were together, and because he was the last one to see her. He was questioned and the house was searched, and the police moved on to friends and acquaintances, trying to get any info they could to help them find her. My wife and I had been over to his house a few times during the ordeal just to hang out and have dinner. She was close with his ex as well. We didn't really discuss his ex, but just hung out like the old days and kept him company for a few nights. The scrutiny of the investigation was causing him to be very isolated. I ended up being interviewed by the police a couple of times, giving them whatever info I had, which wasn't much, because when I was there, nothing was amiss. Same old guy, no changes in personality, nothing odd around the house, etc. The trail was going cold, and it was almost a month after she disappeared. The next day, I got a call from a mutual friend to turn on the news. A helicopter was hovering over my best friend's house, where they had discovered the remains of his ex wrapped in a tarp and garbage bags, duct taped and surrounded by scented candles. She had been stabbed in the chest and suffocated with a plastic bag, and industrial cleaners and solvents had been poured over her to try and cover up the decomposition. The police had a search warrant to seize his cell phone, and one of them smelled decay near the garbage and noticed the body-sized object upon looking into the garage. He confessed and is currently awaiting trial scheduled for July of this year. My wife and I had dinner and hung out with my friend not 30 feet from where they found her body. And having known the guy for almost 2 decades, I saw zero indications that anything was amiss. To this day, I have a hard time coming to terms with it. Thank you, Crow 1980, for allowing me to share this story. My next story is by hellomymellowfellow. So this one is actually happening right now, to a friend of a friend in Montreal, Canada. This might get buried, but Jesse disappeared this past September while he was solo hiking through the Peruvian mountains. He was last seen by 2 French hikers who he camped with on the trail after leaving his hostel for a 5-day trek in Juarez, Peru. He was supposed to be on an 8-month trip before starting his medical degree in the US. A heartbreaking quote from his mother. He's out there, and somebody knows where he is and what happened to him. The family, who is devastated, an ex-Special Ops Israeli search and rescue team to find him, but nothing remotely helpful has turned up. Nothing. Both the mother and father flew down to Peru and have been searching for him since with no luck. Everybody in our community has been super helpful and shocked, but it's definitely been quite the mystery. To answer the question, the family is expectedly not handling it well. They've been trying to raise funds to finance the search and rescue operations and to pay for flights and accommodation in Juarez for the family, while they continue to look. Costs have already exceeded 700,000 Canadian dollars, according to an article. They are in complete disbelief that he could just have vanished. And so, like so many others posting here, they feel that foul play is at hand. Who knows what happened? Maybe he hurt himself hiking. Maybe he came across something illegal in the mountains that he shouldn't have seen. Or maybe he fell prey to a kidnapping. Whatever the case, the 22-year-old definitely did not deserve whatever happened to him. This concludes the story by Hello, My Mellow Fellow, and thank you for allowing me to share this. My next missing person story is solved, but I wanted to include this here because this was once a missing persons case. And this story was shared by GodOfBeverages. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I had a friend who disappeared on July 21st, 2017. He just fell off the face of the planet. Nobody had heard from him in weeks. Fast forward to August 4, and they found him. He was dead in a forest with 3 bullets in his head. His family didn't care. He had no siblings. His mother was dead and his father, like I said, simply didn't care. He died in New Hampshire and I live in Indianapolis, so I have no idea what they did with his body or anything. There was no funeral either. Also, they did end up finding the guy that murdered him, and he's been locked up. Now, GodOfBeverages' story ends here. However, he has issued an update. Thanks to the help of some wonderful Redditors, I was able to find out more information. He was murdered by his boyfriend. He shot him in the head and then buried him under a fire pit in the woods while he was still breathing, and then lit the fire. The man who did it confessed to it all. His body has been claimed, presumably by someone I don't know. I'll look into it more. Thank you all so much for helping me find out more than I would have ever known about one of my best friends. Thank you so much, GodOfBeverages, for allowing me to share your story. My next story is by workingmansalt. My family friend disappeared in early 2000s. Let's call him Red. My parents and their friends were all quite big on speed back in the 80s and 90s, but most of them went off it as they had kids. However, a few moved on to meth and got involved in gang activity. This guy was one of them. The speculation of what happened is that essentially someone else ripped off a few patched gang members in a drug deal and split the cash up between a few associates. One of those associates was the family friend Red. These patched gang members figured it out pretty quick and thrashed the ever-loving shit out of the guy that ripped them off and left him alive, only because they stole all his meth and money, and because he gave the names of the associates out. The gangsters then went around to each associate and got their money back, except for Red, who had already spent the money on meth and smoked it. Red then disappeared, and the police basically think because Red couldn't repay the money and had no drugs or anything to his name, that the gangsters decided to kill him and bury him somewhere, but no body was ever found. The police couldn't link anyone to it, and the case is unsolved. The family handled it relatively well. Red's ex-wife was one of the ones that went off speed and went straight, but she knew the risks involved with that kind of heavy drug scene. The kids were hit hard though. I used to see the two boys all the time when I was young, but now I only see the oldest on occasion. The oldest makes a post on Facebook every year about his dad on Red's birthday. I had a drunken heart-to-heart with him one day about our dads, who were close mates back in the day, and he just basically cried and said to always cherish the fact my dad is there, and that the worst part is no matter what the police say, they will never have closure until Red is found. Workingmansalt also adds, in response to another Redditor's query about Red's age. Apparently Red was in his mid-30s. Thank you so much, Workingmansalt, for allowing me to share your story. My next missing person story is by Wuollis. My mum had this high school friend that she was still in contact with for 40 years after their graduation. The woman, let's call her Lucy, lived a pretty normal life, out in the suburbs with her husband and their daughter. 10 years ago, the daughter immigrated to England, so Lucy and her husband were left to live alone. Last winter, Lucy's husband went out fishing. He would usually be away for a few days, so Lucy didn't worry when the husband didn't come back home after the first 2 days. The worry started when he didn't pick up his phone. She went out to look for him, but didn't find anyone at his favorite fishing spot. She then contacted the police. Divers didn't find any body in the river. Policemen couldn't find the husband either. He just left and never came back. No one knows whether he drowned or was killed or just decided to start a new life elsewhere. Lucy couldn't bear to live all by herself without knowing what happened to him. She would go every week to that river and pray for her husband to come home. Serious health issues then showed up for Lucy. On the first day of Christmas, 2017, she died from a heart attack at the age of 58. Thank you so much, Wuollis, for allowing me to share this story. My next missing person story is by Like a Princess 96. My aunt through marriage disappeared July 14th, 2008. She told her 2 children she was going to the convenience store down the street and that she would be back. Some time later, she frantically called the oldest, who was a teen at the time, from a payphone to tell her to have her cell disconnected because someone snatched it. That's the last any of us heard from her. I was very close to her. I was closer to her than I was to my uncle, which is a long story. I was nearly 12 at the time, and I remember me and my mum trying to get her case exposure. I went around the city hanging missing posters up. We tried to get her story on America's Most Wanted, the news, etc. But it's like her mum was reluctant to do much. I don't know if it was grief or what. It's like she gave up very fast on finding her. My uncle doesn't care much anymore. Me and my mother still care. We love her very much. I haven't talked to my cousins in years, so I don't know how they feel now. I know my youngest cousin isn't doing so well. Within a week of putting flyers up, people took them down. It was a very difficult time, especially when it almost seemed as if no one wanted her to be found. I just hope that if she isn't out there anymore, that she didn't suffer. The thought still hurts. Thank you, Like a Princess 96, for allowing me to share your story. And my last story for this episode is by Exitosa. I had an older cousin that would always come and visit my family every summer, sometimes on Thanksgiving, when I was a kid. She was much older, college age, than my brother and I, so we always were really excited to hang out with her. She would take us to see movies, to eat at restaurants, buy us gifts, and do really cool hairstyles in my hair for me. The last time I saw her, I was about 12. She took me to the mall and bought me an Invader Zim jacket, and we did our usual awesome hangout. I remember having a conversation in the car on the way back to my house, and she promised that we could go do something cool that I wanted the next time she would come to visit. She never came back, and my family hasn't seen or heard from her in 11 years. We can hardly find a trace of her no matter how many times we have tried. We knew that she was moving to another state for her job with an insurance company before her last visit with us, but that is the last details we ever knew, and the only details we could ever find out. It hurt my family quite a bit, because my guardians, non-biological parents, but still family as my legal guardians, who my brother and I lived with, took care of my cousins in her younger years, as if she was one of their own also. We don't know if it was abandonment, or if something terrible happened to her, or anything. Even my other cousins, her sister and brother, don't know what happened to her. Now, all of my family are left to wonder what happened. Recently, about a month ago, my grandmother, the cousin was or is her niece, told me she had a dream that this same cousin walked into a church and sat down next to her deceased great-aunt in a pew. Not the cousin's mother, but my grandma's other sister. At this point, we just have to accept that we will probably never know what happened to her. Strange. And thank you, Exitosa, for sharing your story. Goodness, a huge thank you to all the Redditors that approved my sharing of these stories. I hope those stories that still have people missing find some answers. And I also hope that this episode provided someone out there some useful information. I really enjoy doing these episodes, not because of their entertainment value, but as a learning tool for when situations like this come up in our own lives. Plus, having read Let's Not Meet stories and true accounts from all around the world, I wanted to bring home that not everyone is lucky enough to make it back. And as terrible as that is, it's a reality. Thank you so much for listening. And on a little lighter note, I'll be finishing off Nightmare Lagoon tomorrow and sharing some fan stories. So stick with me then for something, again, very different. And on that note, it is that time. This is the place where stories live, and you tale-tellers come to listen. Enjoy your day or night, and join me every weekday for our creepy tradition. And as always, till next time.